Hazardous Materials Endorsement Training, presented by ELDT1. Basic information. This unit must teach driver trainees the basic HM competencies, including applicable FMCSR requirements when HM is being transported. The training provider must also teach driver trainees HM communication requirements, including shipping paper requirements, marking, labeling, placarding, emergency response information, and shipper's responsibilities. How do you describe a hazardous material? A hazardous material, often shortened to HM or hazmat, is a substance or material determined and designated by the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Transportation, or USDOT, to be capable of posing unreasonable risk to health, safety, or property when transported in commerce. Why is it important for a driver who works with hazmat to understand the importance of safety? Hazmat transport and handling can present potentially serious dangers. A driver who transports hazmat loads must have a good working knowledge of the wide variety of hazmat requirements in order to keep yourself and the public safe. Training requirements. Is training necessary for hazmat drivers? Yes. Training is of utmost importance to ensure a driver safely prepares and transports hazmat loads. Hazardous Materials Regulations, or HMR, require employers to train their hazmat employees to recognize and identify hazmat. Be familiar with hazmat regulations that apply to his or her job. Understand the hazards associated with the materials he or she is transporting. Be aware of the security risks in transporting hazmat and the company's security plan, and be trained to safely operate motor vehicles carrying hazmat. Hazmat driver training requirements. Responsibility for training. A carrier may not transport a hazardous material by motor vehicle unless each of its hazmat employees involved in that transportation is trained as required by the HMR. In addition to the training requirements of Subpart H, Part 172 of the HMR, 177.816 mandates that each hazmat employee who will operate a motor vehicle must be trained in the applicable requirements of 49 CFR, Parts 390 through 397, and the procedures necessary for the safe operation of that motor vehicle. Driver training must include the following topics: pre-trip safety inspection, use of vehicle controls and equipment, operation of vehicle, procedures for maneuvering tunnels, bridges, and railroad crossings, requirements pertaining to attendance of vehicles, parking, smoking, routing, and incident reporting, loading and unloading of materials. May a driver handle hazmat transport before training is complete? An employee may perform a hazmat job function prior to training completion if they are directly supervised by a fully trained employee, and the training is complete within 90 days of employment or a change in job function. Is there a requirement for recurrent training? An employee must be retrained at a minimum every 3 years, and sometimes more often if there is a change in job function or a new regulation. Are there record-keeping requirements for the training? Yes. Training records are required to contain the driver's name, training completion dates, specifics of training materials used, and certification of training as required by the regulations. Please refer to this link in your welcome email. Driver responsibilities. What are the driver's responsibilities in transporting hazmat? A driver is responsible for inspecting the vehicle and ensuring it can handle the hazmat load, verifying the shipping papers contained required information, make sure the cargo is properly labeled, marked, and/or placarded, Properly placing placards on the vehicle and maintaining them during transport. Keeping the shipping papers and emergency response information in their proper place during transport. Driving safely, reporting any accident or incidents to the carrier. Shipper responsibilities. What are the shipper's responsibilities? Identifying the hazmat and select the correct packaging, including labeling. Completing hazmat shipping papers and providing them to the driver. If required, providing placards for the transport vehicle, and in cases of bulk packaging, applying the placards to the container. What is a label? A label is a 4-inch by 4-inch diamond identification attached to a hazmat package that details the contents of the package using specific symbols and colors. What is a placard? A placard is a 10-inch by 10-inch diamond identification attached to the cargo or transport vehicle containing hazmat that details the hazmat using specific colors and symbols. Placards must be placed in specific locations on a truck. Vehicles must display placards on each side and each end. What is bulk packaging? Bulk packaging is packaging including a freight container or transport vehicle that contains hazmat with no intermediate form of containment and meets specific weight and mass requirements. Hazmat classification. When is a material defined as hazardous? A material is defined as hazardous when it is a hazardous substance, hazardous waste, marine pollutant, or elevated temperature material, and/or meets one or more hazard class definitions. What is a hazardous substance? A hazardous substance is defined by regulation and is a certain quantity of a particular material. How many hazard classes are there? There are 9 hazard classes established by regulations and divisions within each hazard class. What are the 9 hazard classes? Explosives, gases, flammable liquids, flammable solids, oxidizers and organic peroxides, poisonous materials, radioactive materials, corrosive materials, miscellaneous materials. Packing groups. What is a packing group, PG? Some hazmats may be divided into packing groups, or PG, which indicate the material's degree of danger. Packing groups are divided into 3 levels of danger, which affect the type of packaging that may be used for the material. What are the 3 packing groups? PG1, great danger. PG2, medium danger. PG3, minor danger. Markings. Marking, labeling, and placarding. A marking is information attached to bulk or non-bulk packaging that, along with labels and placards, helps to identify the contents. What do markings of non-bulk packages include? Markings of non-bulk packages include proper shipping name, identification number which must be a certain size depending on the package size, technical name if applicable, DOT special permit if applicable, consignor's or consignee's name and address unless the package is transported by highway only or is part of a truckload shipment which is being transported in its entirety. What are requirements of markings of large quantities of non-bulk packages? The following are requirements of markings of large quantities of non-bulk packages. Durable, printed in English, printed on or attached to the package surface or label, tag, or sign. Background must be a sharply contrasting color, not concealed by other labels or anything else. located away from any other markings. What do markings of bulk packages include? Materials identification number displayed on an orange panel, primary hazard placard as assigned in the hazmat table, or on a white diamond. Placement of the identification number depends on the packaging capacity. Additional markings may be required depending on the hazmat and packaging. Who is responsible to determine the proper markings? The shipper must determine the proper markings, but the driver must confirm that the markings match the shipping paper description and ensure proper display of the markings. Labels. Are labels required? Most non-bulk hazmat packages must display a diamond-shaped hazard warning label at least 3.9 inches on each side, which is color and symbol coded. Shippers put diamond-shaped hazard warning labels on most hazardous materials packages. These labels inform others of the hazard. If the diamond label won't fit on the package, shippers may put the label on a tag securely attached to the package. For example, compressed gas cylinders that will not hold a label will have tags or decals. What are the two types of labels? The two types of labels are primary labels, which indicate a material's most hazardous material, subsidiary labels, which indicate other less hazardous materials. Who is required to affix the label? The shipper is required to affix the label on the hazmat package prior to transport. What are label requirements? The HMT specifies which label code is required and specifies that the label must be visibly printed on or affixed to the package near the proper shipper name. Sometimes duplicate labels on a package may be required. Placards. What is the purpose of a placard? A placard notifies others of the hazards associated with the materials inside of the package and gives emergency responders important information if a hazmat incident arises. What does a placard look like and when is it used? A placard is a 10 by 10 inch diamond-shaped identification that is attached to freight containers, rail cars, packaging, and transport vehicles containing hazmat. A placard is color and symbol coded. How are placard requirements determined? Table 1 lists hazardous materials that must be placarded when any amount of the material is transported. Organic peroxide, type B, liquid or solid, temperature controlled. Material poisonous by inhalation. Radioactive yellow 3 label only. How are placard requirements determined? Table 1 lists hazardous materials that must be placarded when any amount of the material is transported. Organic peroxide, type B, liquid or solid, temperature controlled. Material poisonous by inhalation. Radioactive yellow 3 label only. Table 2 displays a list of hazardous materials that must be placarded when in a bulk package or when in a non-bulk package and the combined gross weight of all equals or is greater than 1,001 pounds. 1.4 Explosives. When is a dangerous placard used? The transport contains 1,001 pounds or greater of a material found in Table 2, no more than a combined gross weight of 2,205 pounds of one category of Table 2 materials have been loaded at one facility. What steps should be followed when determining if a dangerous placard should be used? The following steps should be followed. Ensure that no Table 1 materials are being transported. Determine that all Table 2 materials in the transport are in non-bulk packages only. Confirm that the total quantity of Table 2 materials is more than 1,001 pounds. Check that the quantity of hazardous material loaded at one facility is less than a combined gross weight of 2,205 pounds. When is a subsidiary placard required? A subsidiary placard is required for subsidiary hazards when certain hazmats are being transported. Common subsidiary placards are poison gas, dangerous when wet, poison inhalation hazard, and corrosive. Where should a placard be placed on a motor vehicle? A placard should be placed on each side and each end of a motor vehicle and should be clearly visible. What are placard requirements on a transport vehicle, freight container, bulk packaging, or aircraft load device? The following are the placard requirements. Must be on a contrasting color background or have a solid or dotted line border that contrasts with the background color. Must be clear of accessory objects and devices, such as pipes, ladders, doors, and tarps. Must be put in a placard holder or securely attached. Must be located at least 3 inches away from any marking. Must not be in a location where dirt or water from the wheels of the transport vehicle could be directed onto the placard. Must have the words or ID number printed on it horizontally from left to right. What is prohibited placarding? Prohibited placarding includes any slogan, advertisement, or sign with design, shape, color, or content that could be confused with a DOT placard. When may a DOT placard be displayed? A DOT placard may be displayed on a freight container, motor vehicle, packaging, unit load device, or rail car if all of the following conditions are met. A hazardous material is being transported. The placard represents the hazardous material being transported. The placard complies with regulations. Operational HM Requirements, Unit 2. The unit must teach driver trainees the proper procedures and contacts for the immediate notification related to certain HM incidents, including instruction in the proper completion and submission of HM incident reports. When is an incident involving hazmat required to be reported? Any hazmat transport that requires a shipping paper and is involved in an incident must report said incident. What are the types of reports? The type of report required depends on the incident's severity. The 2 types of reports are a telephone report and a written report. What is a telephone report? A telephone report to the National Response Center, NRC, must be made by the person transporting the hazmat as soon as possible, but no later than 12 hours following the incident. When is a telephone report required? Hazmat incident telephone notification. Someone is killed or injured requiring hospitalization. A general public evacuation lasting 1 hour or more. Major transportation artery or facility closed for 1 hour or more. The routine flight pattern of an aircraft is altered. Fire, spillage, breakage, or suspected contamination involving radioactive or infectious substances. A marine pollutant is released in a quantity greater than 882 pounds or 119 gallons. An incident aboard an aircraft resulting from a battery fire or explosion. Any other situation deemed reportable in the transporter's judgment. What is a reportable quantity, RQ, of a hazardous material? A reportable quantity is an amount of hazardous materials released into the environment that can cause endangerment to the environment or public health. Persons in charge of a facility must notify the NRC, the local emergency planning committee, and/or state planning commissions of a hazmat incident if the hazmat release is equal to or greater than its RQ. When is a written report required? A written report is required within 30 days following an incident if any of the following occur. A telephone report was required, an unintentional release of hazardous material occurred, a 1,000-gallon or more cargo tank suffers structural damage to the lading retention system regardless of whether hazmat is released, a fire or explosion results from a battery, an undeclared shipment of hazardous materials occurs. Written reports are due within 30 days if required, and update within 1 year if necessary. When does a written report need to be updated? A written report must be updated within 1 year of the date of the occurrence if any of the following occur. A death results from an injury caused by the hazmat incident. Damage, loss, or other related costs arise that were unknown at the time of the incident. Hazmat was misidentified on a prior incident report. When damage, loss, or other related costs change by $25,000 or more, or 10% of the prior total estimate, whichever is greater. How long must a written report be kept? A copy of the written report must be kept for 2 years at the reporting person's place of business. Tunnels and railroad highway grade crossing requirements. When is hazmat permitted in a tunnel? When is a driver transporting hazmat permitted to drive through a tunnel? A driver is permitted to drive through a tunnel when any of the following apply, unless local law expressly prohibits such travel. There is no practical alternative. The tunnel is necessary to reach a terminal, point of loading or unloading, or facilities for food, rest, or repairs. An emergency arises. Railroad crossings. What is a highway rail grade crossing? A highway rail grade crossing is the area where a road crosses the railroad at the same level as the crossing point. When is a driver required to stop at a highway rail grade crossing? A driver is required to stop at a highway rail grade crossing if the vehicle is transporting any of the following hazardous materials. Division 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4 explosives. Division 2.1 flammable gas. Division 2.2 non-flammable gas. Division 2.3 inhalation hazard. Division 3 flammable liquid. Division 4.1 flammable solid. Division 4.3 dangerous when wet. Division 5.1 oxidizer. Division 5.2 organic peroxide. Division 6.1 poison. Division 7 radioactive. Division 8 corrosive. Any amount of chlorine. Any empty or loaded cargo tank that is used to transport hazmat. How far from a railroad crossing should a driver stop? A driver must completely stop no closer than 15 feet and no further than 50 feet from the nearest track. When may a driver be disqualified from operating a CMV? Failing to have sufficient undercarriage clearance to cross. Failure to follow directions of an enforcement officer at the cross or a traffic control device. Failure to slow down if not required to stop and check that the tracks are clear. Failure to stop before reaching the crossing when tracks are not clear. Failure to stop before driving through the crossing. Failure to be able to drive through the crossing completely without stopping. Violations. Specific violations. A driver convicted of operating a commercial motor vehicle or CMV in violation of any of these 6 offenses at a highway rail grade crossing must be disqualified for a specified period of time, not less than 60 days. Drivers who are not required to always stop if they fail to slow down and check that the tracks are clear of an approaching train. Drivers who are not required to always stop but fail to stop before reaching the crossing if the tracks are not clear. Drivers who are always required to stop but fail to stop before driving onto the crossing. Drivers who fail to have sufficient space to drive completely through the crossing without stopping. Drivers who fail to obey a traffic control device like lights or gates, or the directions of an enforcement official at the crossing. Drivers who fail to negotiate a crossing because of insufficient undercarriage clearance, getting stuck on a hump or high-profile crossing. What is the disqualification timeframe for any of these offenses? The driver may be disqualified for 60 days for the first conviction to 1 year for 3 or more convictions if they occur in a 3-year period. Signs and signals. Railroad crossing. Trains always have the right-of-way at railroad crossings. Active railroad crossings will have warning devices, flashing lights, bells, or gates. Passive railroad crossings may only be marked by signs and pavement markings. What are rail crossing signs? Signs are non-electric passive devices that make a driver aware of the approaching crossing. What signs are associated with a railroad crossing? The following are passive signs that make a driver aware of a railroad crossing. Advance warning sign. Typically, the first sign a driver will see when approaching a crossing and is a round yellow sign with a black X and RR. Pavement markings. White letters RXR painted onto the pavement before the crossing. Crossbuck sign. White X-shaped sign with railroad crossing in black letters. Number sign. When there are multiple tracks, the number of tracks is posted below the crossbuck sign. Stop sign. A standard stop sign which may be posted at the crossing. Yield sign. A standard yield sign indicating right-of-way for drivers. Exempt sign. A sign that may be placed at a railroad crossing if users are not required to stop. Do not stop on tracks sign. A black and white sign placed at a crossing advising vehicles not to stop on the tracks. Tracks out of service sign, used instead of a crossbuck when a track is no longer used. Parallel track sign, yellow diamond-shaped sign that warns of the road crossing the track. Low ground clearance sign, warns drivers that conditions may exist where there is low ground clearance. What are rail crossing signals? Signals are automatically activated warning devices that work when a train approaches a highway rail grade crossing. What signals are associated with a railroad crossing? The following are signals that make a driver aware of a railroad crossing. Standard gate, a red and white striped gate arm with attached lights. This active warning device is typically accompanied by flashing light signals and a crossbuck sign, and lowers and extends horizontally across the roadway when a train approaches. Standard bell, a bell that rings loudly when a train approaches and often is accompanied by flashing lights and a standard gate. Flashing light signal, a mandatory device that displays red flashing lights when a train approaches and is used in conjunction with a standard gate and bell. Does a train or a motor vehicle have a right-of-way at a highway rail grade crossing? A train always has the right-of-way. What are some good safety practices to follow when a driver crosses a railroad track? Some good safety practices to follow at a railroad crossing are: shift into the gear you want to use to cross the tracks before you reach the tracks. Lower your windows and listen for a train. Never drive around lowered gates. If available, use a pull-out lane, an extra lane where large vehicles can accelerate and merge after crossing railroad tracks. Check for traffic behind you. Use flashers if necessary. Safety steps. Railroad crossing, 7 steps to safety. 1. Approach with care. Warn others that you are slowing down. Turn on four-way flashers. Use pull-out lane if available. 2. Prepare to stop. Turn off fans and radio and roll down windows. Locate your cell phone for use in emergencies. Stop at least 15 feet, but not more than 50 feet from the nearest rail. 3. Look and listen both ways carefully. Bend forward to see around mirrors and A-pillars. 4. If it won't fit, don't commit. Trains extend beyond the width of the rails at least 3 feet on each side. Remember your vehicle and cargo overhang. 5. Look again. Before you move, look again in both directions. 6. Cross tracks with care. Signal, watch for a safe gap. Pull back onto the road if you used a pull-out lane. Use highest gear that will let you cross without shifting. 7. Keep going once you start, even if lights start to flash or gates come down. What should a driver do if he or she becomes stuck on the railroad tracks? If a driver becomes stuck on the tracks, the driver should immediately exit the vehicle. Move away from the tracks at a 45-degree angle towards the direction of any approaching train. Call the emergency number posted at the crossing or 911 if no number is posted. Loading and unloading HM. This unit must teach driver trainees the proper loading and unloading procedures for hazardous material cargo. Training providers must also teach driver trainees the requirements for proper segregation and securement of HM and the prohibitions on transporting certain solid and liquid poisons with foodstuffs. What are the procedures to follow to safely load and unload hazardous materials? Procedures. The following procedures set forth in the HMR should be followed when loading and unloading hazardous materials. Set the parking brake and chock the wheels. Careful! Use tools with care so as not to damage packages or containers holding hazmat. No smoking. Do not smoke. Markings. Follow orientation markings on packages. Secure. Secure packages for transport. Do not use cargo heaters when transporting Class 1, Division 2.1, or Class 3 hazmats, unless the cargo heater is rendered inoperable. Cargo tanks must be monitored by a qualified person that is within 25 feet of the tank. Compatibility. Ensure that non-compatible hazmats are not loaded, transported, or stored together in accordance with the hazmat segregation table. Loading and unloading requirements for specific hazard classes. Procedures Class 1. The following procedures must be met before or during loading and unloading certain hazard class material. Class 1 Explosives. Turn engine off. Disconnect and disable cargo heaters. Drain cargo heater fuel tanks. Inspect cargo area for anything that could potentially damage packaging. Division 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3 explosives must have a non-ferrous metal or non-metallic lining in the cargo area. Never use bail hooks or other metal tools. Do not roll, throw, or drop packages. Never transfer Division 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3 explosives on a public road, except in an emergency. Do not transport Division 1.1 or 1.2 explosives in triples or vehicle combinations under certain circumstances. Procedure Class 2. Class 2 Compressed gases. Portable tanks must be on a flat floor or platform and secured in place. Cylinders must be stored on a flat cargo floor and secured in an upright or horizontal position, loaded in racks or packed in boxes or crates. Any installed pressure relief valve must be in contact with the cylinder's vapor space if the cylinder contains Division 2.1 flammable gas. Loading or unloading of Division 2.1 flammable gas must occur when engine is off, unless the engine is used for operation of the vehicle's transfer pump. When transporting chlorine, a gas mask and emergency kit must be stored on the vehicle. Procedure Class 3. Class 3 Flammable Liquids. Turn engine off unless needed to operate the vehicle's pump. Most cargo tanks must be grounded before unloading these hazardous materials. Procedure Class 4 and Class 5. Class 4 Flammable Solids and Class 5 Oxidizing. Completely enclose these hazmats in the cargo vehicle or cover securely to ensure they remain dry at all times. Class 6. Class 6.1 Poisonous and Division 2.3 Poisonous gas. Never load these hazmats in the cab or sleeper berth. Do not load in the same vehicle containing food, feed, or edible materials consumed by humans or animals. Class 7. Class 7 Radioactive Materials. Some packages of Class 7 materials bear a number called the Transport Index. The shipper labels these packages Radioactive 2 or Radioactive 3 and prints the package's Transport Index on the label. Radiation surrounds each package, passing through all nearby packages. To deal with this problem, the number of packages you can load together is controlled. Their closeness to people, animals, and unexposed film is also controlled. Table A. Ensure these hazmats are not located in the transport vehicle any closer to a person or animal than is outlined in the following table. Class 8. Class 8 Corrosive. Nitrate acid in concentrations of 50% or greater must not be loaded above any other materials. Load any batteries containing liquid electrolytes in an upright position. Always check. How do I know the rules for compatibility of mixed loads? The rules require some products to be loaded separately. You cannot load them together in the same cargo space. Table HM. The regulations, the segregation and separation chart, name materials you must keep apart. Here are examples of the charts in different formats. Procedure. HM on passenger vehicles. This unit must teach driver trainees the various requirements for vehicles transporting passengers and property, and the types and quantities of HM that can and cannot be transported in these vehicles or situations. Allowable hazardous materials. May hazardous materials be transported on vehicles that carry passengers? Hazardous materials may not be transported on passenger-carrying vehicles unless there is no other practical means of transportation. Some hazmats fall under this exception to the general rule. What hazardous materials fall under the exception? The following exceptions may apply provided certain quantity limitations are met. Small arms ammunition labeled ORM-D, munitions of war from the U.S. Department of Defense, certain Class 7 radioactive materials, emergency shipments of hospital supplies, chemicals, and drugs. Where must the accepted hazmats be transported on the vehicle? All of the hazmats that fall under the exception must be transported in the vehicle's cargo area except for small arms ammunition, which is permitted in the passenger area. Forbidden hazardous materials. What materials are always prohibited on passenger-carrying vehicles? The following hazardous materials are forbidden on passenger-carrying vehicles. Division 2.3 poisonous gas, designated as poisonous by inhalation. Division 6.1 Poisonous, designated as poisonous by inhalation. Any paranitroaniline materials, such as tear gas or other irritating materials. Bulk packages. This unit must teach driver trainees the specialized requirements for transportation of cargo in bulk packages, including cargo tanks, intermediate bulk containers, bulk cylinders, and portable tanks. The unit must include training on the operation of emergency control features, special vehicle handling characteristics, rollover prevention, and the properties and hazards of the HM transported. Training providers must teach driver trainees methods specifically designed to reduce cargo tank rollovers, including but not limited to vehicle design and performance, load effects, highway factors, and drive factors. Intermediate Bulk Containers, or IBC. What is an intermediate bulk container? An IBC is a stackable, reusable, and typically cube-shaped container, often made from metal or plastic. IBCs have an integrated pallet base and are generally 275 or 330 gallons with a screw-on lid and bottom discharge valve. The lid and discharge valve must be closed during transportation. What is a bulk cylinder? A bulk cylinder is a reusable container for transporting compressed gas, which often has an integrated base, so that it may be moved with a forklift or crane. All valves must be closed during transportation. What is a portable tank? A portable tank is a metal, reusable tank that temporarily attached to a cargo carrying vehicle. There may be one or more valves, all of which must be securely closed during transportation. What is a cargo tank? A cargo tank may or may not be permanently attached to a motor vehicle and is loaded and unloaded without being removed from the vehicle. Any nozzle, valve, or cover must be securely closed during transportation. What should a cargo tank driver check before operating the cargo tank? The cargo tank driver should make sure all valves are in correct position before loading, unloading, or transporting. Check for leaks in pipes, hoses, and connections. Check for any dents or leaks on the tank. What other special equipment on cargo tanks should be inspected carefully? If a cargo tank has any of the following special equipment, it should be inspected closely. 1. Vapor recovery system, which allows the recovery of vapors so that they aren't released into the atmosphere. 2. Grounding and bonding cables, which reduce static electricity and sparking. 3. Emergency shutoff systems, which immediately stop the transfer process if a leak or spill occurs. 4. Built-in fire suppression systems, which has sensors that activate the system if a fire is detected. Vehicle handling characteristics. How does a CMV handle differently than a car or truck? Because of its weight and size, a CMV handles differently in the following ways. It takes longer to stop when moving, takes longer to move from a stop, makes wide turns, has large blind spots. Why are CMVs prone to rollovers? CMVs are susceptible to rollovers due to their high center of gravity, especially when loaded. What are ways to reduce the potential of a rollover? To reduce the chance of a rollover, a driver should be aware of weather and road conditions. Make sure vehicle is in good repair. Avoid distractions. Slow down for curves and ramps. Secure the load. Avoid sudden movements. Be familiar with the route. What is surge? Surge may occur when the liquid in a cargo tank moves as a result of the vehicle suddenly stopping or starting. A surge may affect the handling of the CMV. What can help reduce surge? A baffle, which is a perforated wall inside the liquid cargo tank, will help the liquid flow through the tank at a slower rate, therefore reducing the surge. Operating emergency equipment. This unit must teach driver trainees the applicable requirements of the FMCSRs and the procedures necessary for the safe operation of the motor vehicle. This includes training in special precautions for fires, loading and unloading, operation of cargo tank motor vehicle equipment, and shut-off or shut-down equipment. Fires and fire extinguishers. What should a hazmat driver do if there is a fire in the vehicle? A driver should pull off the road and park in an open area if possible, and immediately notify emergency personnel. May a fire extinguisher be used on a fire caused by any type of hazmat? A fire extinguisher will be marked with symbols representing what type of fire it can be used to extinguish. Typically, the extinguishing agent can only extinguish fires caused by a specific hazmat. However, some fire extinguishers are designed to extinguish more than one type of fire and will be marked as such. What are the steps to follow when using a fire extinguisher? When using a fire extinguisher, the following steps should be taken. Pull the pin. Aim at the fire's base, never aim high at the flames. Squeeze the handle. Sweep from side to side at the base of the fire to extinguish. How far away from the fire should someone stand when using a fire extinguisher? When using a fire extinguisher, stand 8 to 10 feet away from the fire. When a fire occurs, what are important steps to take? Critical steps to take when a fire occurs. 1. Ensure your safety and the safety of others. 2. If safe to do so, move the vehicle away from other vehicles, people, and buildings. 3. If possible, attempt to get the fire under control. What steps should be followed when there is a cab or engine fire? When there is a cab or engine fire, the following steps should be taken. Turn off the vehicle and look for fuel leaks if safe to do so. Disconnect the battery if fire is electrical and it would be safe to do so. Do not expose more air to the fire by opening the hood. Instead, attempt to extinguish the fire from underneath or through the louvres. Do not use water on a petroleum-based fire. Carefully follow directions on the fire extinguisher. Do not assume the fire is completely out. What are steps to follow when dealing with a tire fire? Tire fires are dangerous and hard to extinguish. When a tire fire occurs, take the following steps. Remove the tire if this can be done safely. Use water to extinguish the fire. What is important to know when there is a cargo fire? In the event of a cargo fire, keep the following in mind. If smoke is coming from the cargo doors, do not open the doors until the vehicle is in a safe place and emergency personnel have arrived. If safe to do so, remove the tractor from the trailer and move it to a safe place. Inform emergency personnel about the type of cargo in the trailer. Operating a cargo tank, loading and unloading. What is important to know before beginning the loading or unloading process? Before loading or unloading, the driver should know what the hazardous material is, the dangers associated with the hazmat, and the appropriate procedures to follow when loading and unloading. What are the appropriate procedures to follow when loading and unloading? Take the steps below when unloading or loading. Secure the cargo tank by chocking the tires and/or using the parking brake. Turn ignition off. Disconnect the battery if the hazmat has highly volatile vapors. Wear protective equipment. Connect grounding systems and overflow protection. Inspect all transfer equipment. Ensure the hazmat is going into the appropriate tank and can be held safely. Outline a path for the transfer equipment. Make appropriate connections between receiving tank and cargo tank. What should a driver do when loading and unloading a cargo tank? A driver should begin and control the flow of the hazmat during transfer. Monitor the transfer process. Ensure there are no leaks at any connection areas. Check gauges for irregular readings. Stop the flow process if necessary. After transfer is finished, close all valves to stop the flow process. What steps should be followed after the loading or unloading process is complete? After loading or unloading is complete, a driver should depressurize and drain the transfer equipment if necessary. Disconnect the transfer equipment. Secure the transfer equipment. Emergency response procedures. This unit must teach driver trainees the proper procedures and best practices for handling an emergency response and post-response operations, including what to do in the event of an unintended release of an HM. All training, preparation, and response efforts must focus on the hazards of the materials that have been released and the protection of people, property, and the environment. Emergency Response Guidebook, ERG. What is the Emergency Response Guidebook used for? The ERG helps first responders to identify what hazards the materials may present to people or the environment so that they may respond appropriately. Are drivers required to have an ERG in their vehicle? Drivers are not required to have an ERG, but it is a good idea to have one in the event of an emergency. What purpose does each of these 6 sections of the ERG serve? White section, front, provides general transportation information and describes the hazard classification system. Yellow section outlines a list of hazardous materials in numerical order based on its 4-digit ID number. Blue section specifies an alphabetical list of hazardous materials and lists the corresponding 4-digit ID number. Orange section outlines safety recommendations for first responders. Green section contains information regarding toxic gases. White section back contains information on explosives and other additional directions on how to use the ERG. Hazmat incident or accident response. What are some general steps to follow after a hazmat incident? Following a hazmat incident, some general steps to follow include: ensure everyone's safety and warn people of the danger. If necessary, call for assistance. Keep people a safe distance away from the accident. Make sure there is no smoking or open flames nearby. Minimize spreading of hazmat if possible. If vehicle is leaking, move it away from the roadway if it is safe to do so. Inform emergency personnel of hazmat and provide them with ERG and shipping papers. Follow any safety protocol required by your carrier. What are the responses required following an incident with a particular hazmat? Each hazmat class requires a particular response as outlined below. Class 1 Explosives. Do not allow people to remain close to the vehicle. Prohibit smoking and open flames. Warn of potential explosion if there is a fire. Remove explosives and place away from the vehicle and buildings before separating vehicles. Maintain a safe distance away. Class 2 Compressed Gases. Warn others of danger and keep unnecessary people away. Do not allow open flames or smoking. Notify the shipper of incident. Class 3 Flammable Liquids. Warn people of danger and keep unnecessary people away. Do not allow smoking or open flames. Get off the road if it can be done safely. Class 4 Flammable Solids and Class 5 Oxidizers. Warn others of potential fire and keep people away. Prohibit smoking or open flames near the vehicle. Remove smoldering packages from the vehicle if it is safe to do so, but never open smoldering packages. Class 6 Poisons and Infectious Substances. Warn others of fire and inhalation danger. Keep unnecessary people away. Do not allow open flames or smoking near the vehicle. Decontaminate the vehicle. Contact the carrier if packages are leaking. Class 7, radioactive. Maintain a safe distance and keep unnecessary people away. Prohibit smoking and open flames nearby. Do not inhale or touch the hazmat. Contact the carrier. Do not use the vehicle until it has been cleaned and inspected with a survey meter. Class 8, corrosive. Keep unnecessary people away. Do not allow open flames or smoking near the vehicle. Use gloves and avoid skin contact with hazmat. Wash parts of vehicle that were exposed to hazmat. If safe to do so, contain leaks. Post-response operations. What steps should be taken after the incident is under control? After an incident is under control, these steps should be taken. Clean up hazardous substances. Remove wreckage and plan movement of remaining cargo. Contact insurance company. Contact the shipper. Take any necessary medical tests. Engine fueling. This unit must teach driver trainees the procedures for fueling a vehicle that contains HM. Selecting a fuel station. Are drivers restricted to certain fueling stations when hauling hazmat? There is no restriction on what fueling station may be used. However, location, size, and available capacity should be considered when selecting a fuel station. What is the emergency shutoff switch used for? If there is a pump malfunction or another factor necessitating the stoppage of fuel flow, the emergency shutoff switch located near the pump should be used. When is a spill kit used? A spill kit should be used when the tank is overfilled or fuel is spilled on the ground. When should a fire extinguisher at a fueling station be used? If there is a small fire due to a fuel spill, a fire extinguisher located on a pole at each pump or outside the fuel building should be used. It should not be used to combat a large fire. After parking the vehicle at a fuel pump, what steps must a driver take? A driver must turn off the engine, be in control of the fueling process at the point where the fuel fills the tank. Ensure that the fuel hole nozzle is continuously in contact with the fuel tank. Do not expose any open flame near the vehicle, including smoking. What should a driver do after filling the fuel tank? After fueling the vehicle, the driver should move it forward to allow the next vehicle to begin fueling. Tire check. This unit must teach driver trainees the proper procedures for checking the vehicle tires at the start of a trip and each time the vehicle is parked. What equipment is used to check tires? The following equipment is used to check tires. Tire pressure gauge, used to measure the tire pressure. Tread depth gauge, used to measure the tire's tread depth. Tire chalk or crayon, used to mark areas on a tire that need to be repaired. When should tires be inspected? If the vehicle is placarded with hazmat, the tires must be inspected at the beginning of each trip and when the vehicle is parked. Generally, what should be inspected? The driver should inspect the outer sidewall, tread, inner sidewall, and valve stem. The driver should inspect the outer sidewall, tread, inner sidewall, and valve stem. What should the driver be inspecting for? Tire pressure. This should be checked when the tires are cold and ideally 3 hours after the vehicle has been driven. Tire pressure should be as close as possible to the manufacturer's recommended tire pressure. If the pressure is 20% below the recommended pressure, then the tire is considered flat. Foreign objects. If a foreign object penetrates the tire casing, the tire is out of service, OOS. A driver should never attempt to remove a foreign object from the tire. Bulges. Generally, a bulge indicates an OOS condition unless the bulge is less than 3/8 of an inch and is accompanied by a blue repair triangle. Air leaks. The driver should try to find and mark the leak so it is easier to repair at a later time. Cuts, cracks, or gouges. If any expose a tire's core, then the tire is OOS. Tread depth. This should be measured in several locations. Front steering tires must have a depth of at least 4/32 of an inch, while the other tires must have 2/32 of an inch depth. Missing valve caps. These are important to prevent buildup in the valve stem. Mismatched or incorrect sized tires. Tires should all be the same size to prevent tire failure or early tire wear. Each axle should have all bias ply or radial tires. Abnormal wear patterns. These indicate tire issues and should be examined by a tire service technician. Rim and lug nuts. Lug nuts should be tight and in good shape, and the rim shouldn't be cracked or bent. What should a driver do if a tire is found to be overheated during an inspection? If a tire is found to be overheated, the driver must remove it and put it a safe distance away from the vehicle. Don't operate the vehicle until the problem is solved. Tire pressure should be checked when a tire is cold, not overheated. What should a driver do with an out-of-service tire? The vehicle must not be operated with an OOS tire until the tire is replaced or repaired. Routes and route planning. This unit must teach driver trainees the proper routing procedures that they are required to follow for the transportation of radioactive and non-radioactive HM. Non-radioactive hazardous material routes. What are the route restrictions if a vehicle is placarded for non-radioactive hazmat? The driver must avoid heavily populated areas. The vehicle may travel through these areas only if one of the following conditions exist. Emergency conditions that require traveling through the area. There is no reasonable alternative. Travel is necessary to reach points to load or unload, reach terminals, or get to places for food, fuel repairs, rest, or safe haven. Radioactive hazardous materials routes. Is a vehicle containing Class 7 radioactive materials permitted on a highway? The vehicle is prohibited from travel on a public highway unless all of the following conditions are met. The driver has received specific written training regarding transporting Class 7 radioactive materials within the past 2 years. The driver has a certificate of training in his or her possession. The driver has a written route plan in possession containing the following: originating and destination points, route and planned stops, estimated arrival and departure times, emergency telephone numbers. What is the National Hazardous Materials Route Registry? This registry provides updated information regarding restricted and designated roads and preferred highway routes for transporting non-radioactive hazmat and Class 7 radioactive hazmat. Hazardous Materials Safety Permits, HMSP. This unit must teach driver trainees the proper procedures and operational requirements, including communications, constant attendance, and parking that apply to the transportation of HM for which an HMSP is required. What is a Hazardous Materials Safety Permit, HMSP? The HMSP was developed by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, FMCSA, to improve safety on highways. A carrier must comply with hazardous material regulations and maintain a specific level of safety in their operations in order to receive a permit. What does the HMSP apply to? The HMSP applies to interstate, intrastate, and foreign carriers transporting certain hazardous materials in particular quantities. What must a carrier have in order to be issued a HMSP? A motor carrier must have the following: a satisfactory safety rating, an up-to-date hazardous material security plan, a certificate of registration with the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, a communication system, a written route plan for Class 7 radioactive materials, or Division 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3 explosive materials. Required level of insurance coverage. When will the FMCSA refuse to issue an HMSP? The FMCSA will not issue a permit to carriers that have a crash rating in the top 30% of the national average, or to a driver, vehicle, hazmat, or a driver, vehicle, hazmat, or total out-of-service rate in the top 30% of the national average. HMSP attendance and parking requirements. What are attendance requirements for vehicles containing Division 1.1, 1.2, or 1.3 explosive materials? The vehicle must be attended at all times. The vehicle is attended when the driver is awake and inside the vehicle, or is within 100 feet of the vehicle with an unobstructed view. What are the parking requirements for vehicles containing Division 1.1, 1.2, or 1.3 explosive materials? The vehicle must not be parked on or within 5 feet of traveled portion of highway or public street, on private property without the owner's consent, within 300 feet of a bridge, tunnel, dwelling, or place where people congregate, except for brief periods of time due to an emergency.